What if I told you, the biggest global war wasn't fought with guns, but with tariffs? Trade wars are supposed to destroy economies, but for America, it was the beginning of a new empire. Trade war triumph. America's 50-year reign and the shifting global order. Is the United States winning the trade war? And more importantly, what does this conflict signal about the future of global power over the next 50 years? Far from being a simple dispute over tariffs, the current dynamic between the US and China is a multifaceted, strategic competition for influence, technology, and economic dominance that is reshaping the 21st century world order. And the signs increasingly point towards continued American leadership. This isn't just about the policies of a single administration, like the initial moves by President Trump. The strategic recalibration towards viewing China as a primary competitor, or, as some might put it, a generational rival, has become a bipartisan consensus in Washington. Regardless of who occupies the White House in the coming years, whether Democrat or Republican, the core strategy of countering China's rise and protecting American interests will persist. And this strategy is poised for success in the long run, potentially securing America's position at the forefront of global power for the next 3 to 5 decades. But why this confidence? What makes the U.S. position so robust, even amidst trade tensions and global economic uncertainties? The answer lies in a combination of strategic geopolitical maneuvering, inherent economic resilience, and a focus on the key battlegrounds of the future. Strategic moves on the global chessboard. Consider one of the most striking early signals during the initial phase of this intensified competition: President Trump's decision to make the Middle East his first foreign destination after officially taking office. This wasn't just a courtesy visit, it was a calculated move on the geopolitical chessboard with profound economic and strategic implications. The resulting deals, particularly with Saudi Arabia, were staggering. Commitments reportedly ranged from $600 billion and potentially soaring past $1 trillion in investments into the U.S. economy. Crucially, this included massive orders for American military hardware and commercial aircraft from Boeing. Why such a colossal purchase, especially from the Middle East, and at a time when other nations, like China, were temporarily halting Boeing orders? This move wasn't altruistic, it was strategic. It served multiple American interests simultaneously. Recycling petrodollars, encouraging oil-rich nations to invest their vast wealth into the U.S. economy, rather than potentially diversifying towards competitors. Boosting American industry, securing massive contracts for key sectors like defense and aerospace, creating jobs and strengthening the industrial base. Solidifying alliances, reinforcing long-standing strategic partnerships in a critical region, pushing back against growing Chinese and Russian influence. Establishing economic leverage, demonstrating the U.S.'s ability to command massive capital flows and significant economic deals, even amidst trade tensions elsewhere. Furthermore, reports of commitments from other Gulf nations, such as the astonishing reported pledge of $1.2 trillion in investments into the U.S. by Qatar's leadership, underscore the scale of capital attracted by the U.S. even under pressure. This isn't just about diplomacy, it's about leveraging America's unique position to secure economic and strategic advantages on a global scale. It shows a level of influence and deal-making prowess that competitor nations currently struggle to match. Another critical factor is understanding the nature of economic downturns and why the U.S. is better positioned to weather them than many others, particularly emerging markets. It's vital to distinguish clearly between an economic recession and an economic depression. A recession is a significant, widespread, and prolonged downturn in economic activity. A depression is a more extreme and prolonged form of recession. As we've seen during periods of trade friction, markets react. The U.S. stock market, for instance, experienced notable corrections, around 21% for the S&P 500 and Nasdaq, and roughly 19% for the Dow Jones Industrial Average following key trade announcements like the imposition of tariffs on China on April 4, referencing the context of the original speech. While such corrections feel sharp, they fall within the historical range for typical recessionary adjustments, which average between 24 to 27% for the S&P 500. The possibility of a market correction, perhaps even retesting previous lows before heading higher, is a normal part of the economic cycle during challenging periods. This is a correction or a potential recessionary dip, not an impending depression. The fundamental difference lies in the structural strength and flexibility of the U.S. economy. Anchored by the U.S. dollar's status as the world's primary reserve currency, deep and liquid capital markets, a culture of innovation, robust legal frameworks, and a dynamic labor market, the U.S. possesses an inherent resilience that many other nations lack. Compare this to the vulnerability often seen in emerging markets, particularly in Asia, that rely heavily on exports and often hold significant dollar-denominated debt. The memory of the 1997 Asian financial crisis, which started in countries like Thailand, South Korea, and Indonesia, remains stark. I recall vividly accounts from friends working in Thailand at the time, describing how the Thai baht plummeted, making imports cripplingly expensive while exports became dirtily cheap, a sign of profound economic distress and currency devaluation that required years of painful restructuring and international bailouts from the IMF and World Bank to overcome. Could a similar scenario unfold in parts of Asia in the mid-2020s amidst global economic friction and supply chain shifts? The risk is certainly present for economies less diversified or burdened by debt. While China's economy is vast and its government has levers for intervention, it is also grappling with significant internal challenges, from real estate bubbles and local government debt to demographic shifts and the direct impact of trade barriers. The question looms: can China truly bail out vulnerable neighbors if its own economic foundations are under strain from a protracted strategic competition? The trade war is merely the tip of the spear in this larger contest. The future of global power for the next 50 years will be decided on different battlegrounds. 1. Technology, the race for dominance in artificial intelligence, semiconductors, quantum computing, biotechnology, and next-generation telecommunications, 5G per 6G, is paramount. U.S. efforts to restrict access to advanced technology, like semiconductor manufacturing equipment, and secure critical supply chains are not just economic protectionism, they are strategic moves to maintain a technological edge that is vital for both economic prosperity and military superiority. China's drive for self-sufficiency in these areas is a direct response, highlighting the intensity of this rivalry. 2. Supply chains. The global pandemic and geopolitical tensions have accelerated a move away from hyperglobalization towards de-risking, friendshoring, and nearshoring. The U.S. and its allies are actively seeking to build more resilient supply chains, reducing reliance on potential adversaries. This reshaping of global manufacturing and logistics networks will have profound economic and strategic consequences, potentially favoring nations within trusted blocs. 3. Alliances and influence. The U.S. continues to leverage its robust network of alliances, NATO, AUKUS, the Quad, bilateral treaties in Asia, to project power and contain rivals. China is simultaneously working to expand its own sphere of influence through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative and expanding groupings like BRICS. The competition for diplomatic, economic, and military partnerships in crucial regions like Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia will be a defining feature of the coming decades. 4. Norms and governance. The contest extends to shaping international rules and institutions, from trade regulations to standards for emerging technologies and norms in cyberspace and outer space. The power that sets the standards often holds the keys to future economic and strategic advantage. Pulling these threads together, strategic control over key resources, like energy via fortified Middle East ties, inherent economic resilience and the ability to attract global capital, a relentless focus on technological superiority, and a robust system of alliances, paints a compelling picture. The tariff war, while impactful, is best understood as a negotiating tactic within a much broader, long-term strategy. It's a demonstration of willingness to use economic leverage to achieve strategic ends, ensuring fair competition, protecting intellectual property, and slowing a rival's trajectory while bolstering one's own position. Based on the evidence and the underlying structural advantages, the United States appears well positioned to not only navigate the current period of global flux but to continue leading the world in terms of economic power, technological innovation, and military capability over the next 50 years. The path won't be without challenges, and the competition will remain fierce. But the strategic foundation being laid, focusing on resilience, innovation, and alliances, points towards a future where American influence remains preeminent in the evolving global order. The world is indeed under a new kind of order, one defined by strategic competition across multiple domains. And in this contest, America's core strengths and recent strategic maneuvers suggest it is not just competing, but is on a path to securing its future global leadership. The race for global supremacy: who will lead the world in the next 20, 30, 50 years? For decades following the Cold War, the world largely operated under what was often described as Pax Americana, a period of relative peace and stability led by the United States as the sole superpower. This was a unipolar world order where the U.S. set the tone for global economics, politics, and security. However, this landscape is undergoing a profound transformation with the undeniable rise of China. China's ascent isn't just economic, it's a multifaceted surge encompassing military, political, and technological dimensions. Remember when China was primarily seen as the world's factory, largely producing goods for the West, particularly the United States? Capital flowed from the U.S., which itself was a post-World War II manufacturing powerhouse from roughly 1945 to 1965, to regions like Mexico in search of cheaper labor. Then, following Deng Xiaoping's economic reforms in 1979, capital poured from the US, Europe, and even Mexico into China, leveraging its vast, low-cost workforce. But something fundamentally shifted around 2014. China began to openly embrace more ambitious goals, moving beyond manufacturing into high-tech industries like shipbuilding and, critically, artificial intelligence. As illuminated by figures like Kai-Fu Lee in his insightful work on AI, China explicitly set a strategic objective: to become a global, super AI power, entering into direct competition with the United States. This transition from hiding and biding under previous leadership to a more assertive stance under Xi Jinping inevitably creates friction with the existing superpower. Think of it this way: for years, the US employed China, perhaps as a sort of highly efficient housekeeper or even a key manager for the global household. If that manager diligently performed their duties, there might be no issue. But now, that manager wants to take over the house, become the master, and perhaps even evict the original owner. This fundamental shift in ambition makes direct conflict unavoidable and unacceptable to the established power. The US, therefore, must find ways to either compel China back to its previous position or, more likely, seek to curtail its growth and competitive drive, much as they successfully did with Japan in the 1980s and 1990s, contributing to Japan's subsequent, lost decades, exacerbated by its aging population. The ongoing trade tensions and tariffs, often characterized as a trade war, are not merely about reciprocal duties. According to this perspective, they are but one tool, a visible means employed by the U.S. elite, regardless of who occupies the White House, whether it's Trump or future presidents, to strategically limit China's progress across economic, political, and military spheres. So, looking ahead 20, 30, or even 50 years, who is best positioned to lead the world? While China presents a formidable challenge, several factors suggest the United States is likely to retain its position as the preeminent global power. Here are the reasons why I can say so. 1. Energy, the enduring power of black gold. A series of recent high-profile visits to the Middle East by President Donald Trump provides a compelling example. These trips were framed as immediate victories, securing massive commitments that many observers might have overlooked the full significance of. Consider the reconciliation with Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, MBS. Previously, there was significant tension, particularly during the Biden administration, which strained relations between the U.S. and its long-standing strategic partner. Taking advantage of this friction, Russia and China had begun to make inroads in the region. However, Trump's visit swiftly changed the dynamic. MBS reportedly committed to a staggering $600 billion initial investment in the U.S., alongside a pledge to purchase $142 billion in U.S. defense articles and services. Furthermore, Saudi Arabia's Datavolt committed $20 billion to invest in US AI data centers, enhancing energy infrastructure. MBS himself indicated these were just initial steps, promising an eventual $1 trillion investment in the US in the coming months, a bold declaration from a nation known for keeping its word, especially given their vast wealth and ambitious projects like the futuristic city of Neom. The momentum continued with a visit to Qatar. An economic agreement worth an astonishing $1.2 trillion was reportedly signed, double the initial Saudi commitment. Qatar, a nation known for its immense wealth, exemplified by its ownership of football giants like Manchester City via Qatar Sports Investments, made significant pledges, including a $96 billion order for 210 Boeing aircraft, 787 Dreamliners and 777X, equipped with advanced GE aerospace engines, the largest wide-body order in Boeing's history. Smaller deals included billions in quantum computing and defense technology investments, with Qatar also reinforcing its commitment to funding the U.S. Al Udeid Air Base with an additional $38 billion to bolster defense capabilities using U.S. equipment. These nearly $2 trillion in commitments represent massive job creation and investment flowing into the U.S., coupled with significant arms sales. But the strategic takeaway goes deeper. This reaffirmation of alliances in the Middle East highlights a crucial point often missed in the rush towards green energy. Oil and fossil fuels will likely remain the dominant energy source for transportation and global logistics for the next 30 to 50 years. Why is this significant? Because the ME argues that the shift towards electric vehicles, EVs, and green energy is a game initiated by China. China dominates key aspects of the EV supply chain, including battery technology, like CATL, and the mining and processing of rare earths necessary for batteries and components. You might notice that while Chinese companies like BYD, now the world's largest EV maker, Xiaomi, and even Vietnam's VinFast are pushing hard into EVs, major established global automakers like Toyota, Honda, Suzuki, and leading German, British, and Italian manufacturers are far more cautious. Many are investing heavily in hybrids, like Toyota's successful strategy in the US market, or exploring hydrogen fuel cells, but largely shying away from going all in on fully electric vehicles. Their reluctance stems from a strategic understanding, entering a market where China controls the most critical components, batteries being the engine of an EV, means becoming dependent. Toyota, for instance, has publicly stated its reservations about exclusively pursuing full EVs. Western and Japanese automakers are sticking to internal combustion engines, ICE, and hybrids because they believe fossil fuels remain the backbone of future transportation energy. Why? Because global air travel, shipping, and heavy industry still overwhelmingly rely on petroleum-based fuels. Electric planes are still largely in the realm of science fiction. Moreover, the US holds a dominant position in traditional energy. It is already the world's largest oil producer. Recent discoveries, such as the massive Sikai field in Alaska, located in the Pika Unit area on the North Slope, spanning 1,315 square kilometers, primarily owned by APA Corporation, Santos, and NFE, containing potentially hundreds of millions of barrels of recoverable high-quality oil, solidify the US's position not just as a major consumer but as a global energy powerhouse. As Trump reportedly highlighted to Canada's Prime Minister, the US doesn't need to rely on others for energy, it has immense domestic reserves. The narrative of transitioning away from oil plays into China's strengths in EVs and batteries. By doubling down on alliances with major oil producers and highlighting its own massive reserves, the US is asserting that black gold remains its strategic ace, a game China cannot win in the foreseeable future because it lacks significant domestic reserves and relies heavily on imports. While China will push EVs globally, established powers in the US, Japan, Korea, and Europe are not fully committing, preferring the proven energy source where the US and its allies hold sway. The environmental arguments around EV battery production, pollution and disposal add another layer of complexity that makes green less straightforward than proponents claim. 2. Technology and innovation, the magnet for global intellect. While China has made significant strides in technology and boasts top-tier universities producing highly skilled engineers and scientists, the US retains a critical, perhaps insurmountable, advantage: it is a global magnet for talent. The US democratic system and open culture attract the best and brightest from every corner of the world: Europe, Asia, Africa, Latin America. Regardless of their origin or ethnicity, Chinese, Indian, Russian, European, etc., individuals with exceptional intellect and skills are welcomed, offered opportunities for education, scholarships for PhDs, research and development in leading companies and institutions. This continuous influx of global talent fuels innovation in a way that is simply not replicated in China, where the talent pool, while vast, is primarily limited to ethnic Chinese individuals or those of Chinese descent, whether domestic or overseas. In crucial technological frontiers like advanced semiconductors, driven by initiatives like the CHIPS Act, and cutting-edge AI research and infrastructure, like the Blackwell systems, currently restricted from export to China, the US maintains a lead. While China can develop large language models, LLMs, they are currently constrained by access to the most powerful processing chips, which are controlled by the US. This constraint limits the speed and scale of their innovation compared to the US. Furthermore, in fields like quantum computing, advanced materials, and aerospace, the US ecosystem of universities, private companies, and government research labs continues to push boundaries, drawing on this diverse global brain trust. 3. The almighty dollar, financial hegemony. Perhaps the most potent weapon in the US arsenal is the dominance of the US dollar as the world's primary reserve currency and the standard for international trade, particularly in critical commodities like oil. While China aspires to challenge the dollar's supremacy by promoting the yuan for international transactions and exploring alternative currency blocks, like BRICS, potentially backed by gold, this is an uphill battle likely to take decades, if it succeeds at all. Global trust and liquidity in the dollar are deeply entrenched. When Saudi Arabia or Qatar sell oil, they do so in dollars. Buying anything significant on the global market typically requires dollars. The ruble or yuan simply do not possess the same level of widespread acceptance or convertibility. The US also controls its own financial destiny in a unique way. Concerns about the US national debt ceiling, currently around $36 trillion, are often raised, but as figures like Scott Bond have pointed out, the US has the ability to simply raise the debt ceiling and print more dollars. Since the debt is denominated in its own currency, the risk of a true default is negligible. This is a power no other nation, certainly not China, possesses to the same degree with its currency on the global stage. Moreover, the US is strategically positioning itself in the future of finance by proactively engaging with and regulating cryptocurrencies and stablecoins. By aiming to control the technology and flow of these emerging digital assets, the US is ensuring that its financial power extends into the next generation of currency and transactions. As the saying goes, he who controls the money, controls the world. The US financial system, as Warren Buffett has noted, is uniquely structured to foster wealth creation, fortunes, through its dynamic capital markets. 4. Strategic resource control and partnerships. While China currently dominates the extraction and processing of rare earths, critical minerals needed for high-tech industries, the US is actively working to mitigate this vulnerability. This involves domestic exploration, though often more expensive, and, crucially, forging international partnerships. Agreements with countries like Ukraine and Brazil to develop their mineral resources are part of a long-term strategy to diversify supply chains and reduce dependency on China. This is a patient game of fight and talk, applying pressure while simultaneously building alternative foundations. While China will undoubtedly continue its ambitious pursuit of global influence, particularly through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, seeking new markets for its production capacity and technology, especially in Southeast Asia, the fundamental advantages held by the United States appear too significant to overcome in the next few decades. The US holds sway over the world's most critical energy source, oil, controls the dominant global currency, the dollar, leads in core technological innovation, and possesses an unparalleled ability to attract global talent due to its open, democratic system. China's strengths in manufacturing scale, domestic talent development, and strategic infrastructure investment are real, but they are not yet sufficient to displace the deep-seated advantages of the U.S. ecosystem, an ecosystem built on financial power, technological frontiers fueled by global intellect, and strategic alliances based on shared energy interests. This is a complex and ongoing competition, a brain game on a global scale. But based on the core strengths in energy, finance, technology, and the magnetic pull of its open society on global talent, the argument for the United States maintaining its position as the leading global superpower for the foreseeable future remains compelling. For individuals looking ahead, focusing on future-proof skills in STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, AI, and robotics, and aiming to be a global citizen, appears to be the most prudent path, regardless of which nation is at the helm. The world order is shifting, but the foundations of American power seem robust for the challenges ahead. This is not just a victory, it is a blueprint for the economy in 2025 and for many years to come. America's victory on the tariff battle means new opportunities, and new challenges, coming to you. Stay one step ahead by subscribing to this channel. We have market analysis, forecasts and more for you. If you don't want to miss out, follow my channel, turn on notifications, and share this video widely. Your support is the only reason we can research these explosive topics. See you in the next one.